Welcome to Election Watch. I'm Janice Mays. Like you, I too am surprised that we are suddenly and only 5 days away from this year's election. As nail-biting as that is, we, like you, are moving forward. Since January, we've been diligently covering every twist and turn of this election season, from primary battles to key policy debates and the latest polling data. Today, we're going to focus on the 2024 House races and discuss what to expect post-election. Joining me to do just that are Roz Brooks, who leads PwC's public policy team, and Julie Riccio, a director on that team. Roz and Julie, thank you.
Thank you, Janice.
Before we get to the prospects for the House, kind of what are your broader observations about the race so far? Roz, what about you?
I think, we were talking a little bit earlier about how we've seen the candidates, I think, go to unusual forms of media that we hadn't seen in the prior election. So even though 2020 was a COVID election and you would have thought digital media was that would have been the height of kind of outreach on digital media, the fact that you've seen candidates go to podcasts, go on late night shows, well, late night shows are not new, but the different mediums, the podcasts, the social media apps, it's just made me feel old. But I think that it's the signal of new generations coming in and suggesting ways to reach every voter that's eligible.
It is a very targeted outreach, more so than I think it's been in the past. Julie, your thoughts?
So I think that uncertainty that existed at the beginning of the election cycle still exists today, especially, 5 days out, especially the uncertainty on who will sit in the White House and who will control the House of Representatives. At the same time, I keep going back to this divisiveness that continues to build and build, it seems, between the parties. And if you look at the electorate, at the end of the day, whoever is sitting in the White House, at least half the country would be dissatisfied with the result. So that is going to be a real challenge, I think. How do you move forward as legislators, as a country, to figure out some of these really challenging legislative issues? And that will start as soon as the lame duck, right after the election.
The nation's disruption does get in the way of achieving policy goals. These places are mirrors of the country at large. But we've got all 435 of those House seats up for grabs in this election, and the balance of power is likely to be decided by just 43 of the most competitive races, according to the most recent Cook Political Report, as our audience can see on this graphic. Republicans could maintain control of the House by winning 11 of the 25 seats rated as toss-ups if they also secure the seats that are rated as likely and lean Republican. So it's a pretty close race. The House of Representatives races, which ones of those are you watching? And Julie, let's start with you.
So remember, Janice, Democrats only need a net gain of 4 seats to retake their majority in the House. So if you look at going back to the 2020 cycle, you had a number of California Republicans that won in some of those districts. 2022, you had a number of New York Republicans that were elected. And that's how Republicans gained their majority in the House. So if you look at the combination of those handful of seats in California and New York, that's really where political pundits and these campaigns have zoned in on, right? Interestingly, though, the presidential, if you look at California and New York, statewide, those are known as blue states. So it'll be an interesting dynamic to see, will those sitting Republican incumbents in those districts be able to prevail off the coattails of former President Donald Trump, as well as some of the Senate races that are happening. There's likely to be some impacts on some of the coattails of the Senate races. You have a number, at least 7 competitive Senate races that have really narrowed the gap in recent weeks in the polling, some of them narrowing just a 2-point lead. So things seem to be getting tighter and tighter as we approach the election. At the same time, a lot of political pundits are looking at Nebraska too. You have a Republican incumbent, Don Bacon, sitting there. The reason Democrats are targeting that district, that one district in the state, it's widely known as a red state, but they're calling this the blue dot, putting out tremendous amounts of financial resources to try to flip this district. They've done that for years. However, they think with having Vice President Kamala Harris on the ticket, it's likely that this could be their year to flip it. And that's important because that district, Nebraska is one of 2 states where you could see presidential electoral votes be awarded there. So it's a national focus, but also a focus for the Republican House.
Most states do that statewide.
Right.
In Nebraska and Maine, they allocate some of those votes by congressional district. That may be that one vote that takes a candidate over the 270 or to the 270 mark.
And I'd just like to add, as Julie was saying, when you talk about California and New York being kind of the focus for both parties, actually, as you think about potentially the change in power and looking at those seats, California, we know, it can take a while for results to come in. And so the House isn't something we may even know directionally where the presidential race is headed before we know where the House is. And so maybe we're looking at the end of the week, into the next week, who knows really, but it's interesting that we know going in that we're not going to know the day after kind of who controls the House.
Some states have just take longer to count those votes. And in a divisive year, they need to be very careful. But let's switch gears right now. Let's look beyond November 5th and what policies you think this election will affect with a new administration, whichever one it is at this point. Where will their focus be?
Right. So we've heard a lot from the candidates on the trail about what their primary focus is. You think about Vice President Harris. She's talked about targeting middle-class policies, thinking about taxes in particular. They both have expressed policies around taxes. Tax is the one thing that I've been telling companies. You talk about there's uncertainty going into the election. There's uncertainty. One thing is certain. Something is happening on taxes next year. The Tax Cut and Jobs Act provisions expire. You'll either have them expiring. I know there's strong opinions that Congress will not let them expire, and there's going to be, but whether they expire or they have to do something, that is an area where there is going to be some type of activity, some type of action. And then you think about both candidates have talked about competition with China and American leading on innovation. So the expectation that industrial policy, trying to bring America back from a manufacturing standpoint, the investment in, you think about things like the CHIPS Act, that kind of investment continuing. So investment in innovation, technology, continuing to occur. So that's kind of what I'm looking at when you think about policy that is likely to occur in either administration.
Another one I'll add to the list is the debate on trade and tariffs. Those have been 2 other hot topics on the campaign trail. Those could end up in the mix as far as when you think about tariffs and will that be a way to pay for tax reform. At the same time, if you look in the Senate and the House, you have leadership elections that will happen. They've scheduled them now to begin on November the 13th in both chambers, immediately following the elections. If you look at the Senate leadership elections, you have Senator John Thune and Senator John Cornyn who are vying to replace Leader McConnell in the Senate. And should they be there, they're hailing from the Senate Finance Committee. And that is likely to impact the policy and the debate around tax reform in 2025. At the same time, Speaker Mike Johnson, his fate is likely being held in the balance of who controls the House. If Republicans maintain control, he might be more safe. Otherwise, you're likely to have some challenges there. And remember, leadership elections and choices matter because those characters will be overseeing a lot of these policy changes come 2025.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add kind of on that point, we're talking about policy, like what's going to be impacted 2025. Like we have something even closer, right? Those elections are going to matter for the lame duck when we think about funding that has to occur. So government funding expires December 20th. We have supplementals people are talking about to take care of natural disasters that have occurred. They mentioned that the Small Business Administration is running out of money. You have the Farm Bill, NDAA, so things that have to get done in the lame duck. And the results of the election is going to matter politically in terms of how we see that play out and how close we get to the edge in terms of, and how far funding goes when we think about So it has real implications for the lame duck as well.
Even though that is the current Congress coming back, the lame ducks as such, it absolutely affects the mood of what they're willing to do or not, this outcome of this election. Well, unfortunately, Roz and Julie, thank you. We have to stop there. So we will keep talking as we go along here. As we are into the home stretch, you'll hear from us a few more times. This Friday, look for Andrew Pryor's insights on Week in Review. And on Monday, Rohit and I will be back on Monday Briefing. And another episode of Election Watch will come your way next week. The last few days of an election are always intense, and my suggestion is to take a breath. Easier said than done, but until next time, take care.